Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're incredibly excited to be piloting our first ever webinar series with you today. My name is Jamie and I am joined by Sherlyn, who will be co-hosting with me today, as well as Brandon and Kylie from the SimplePay training team, who will be presenting on today's topic. So today's session will focus on leave entitlement policies, and we'll be looking at creating and assigning leave entitlement policies specifically as part of a bigger or broader four-part pilot series that we will intend to cover all things leave related. So just before we get started and while we wait for a few other participants to join, Sherlyn and I are going to spend some time explaining how things will work today. But first, can I just check that everyone can hear and see me now? Can we use an emoji just so that I can see that everyone can hear and see me? Cool. I see some coming through on the chat. Perfect. Okay, so I think everyone can see and hear me. If anyone is struggling to hear or see me, please feel free to message either Sherlyn or me directly using the chat feature, and we will try and troubleshoot with you. So the goal of today's webinar is to be as interactive and engaging as possible. So you'll notice a few polls that will pop up on your screen periodically. Please participate, even if you're not sure of the answer. Who said what is completely anonymous, I promise. We would also like to encourage as many questions as possible, so please make use of the Q&A functionality throughout the session. All participants will also be muted for the first part of the session, and questions will be answered towards the end of the session, at which stage and after the recording has ended, participants may choose to speak if they would like.
Hi everyone, my name is Sherlyn. Jamie and I are part of the customer success team here at SimplePay. Similarly, I'm really glad to have you here with us on our pilot episode. Before we start the session, please note that we will be recording the webinar and we will be uploading the recording onto our website as a training resource for customers needing assistance in regards to the topics that we will be covering today, right? So all identities will be protected and participant webcams will also be disabled throughout the session. At the end of the session, after wrapping up our time spent on Q&A, we've prepared a survey in order to provide you guys with a platform to send through any and all feedback of the webinar. Needless to say, we'd really appreciate everyone including as much detail as possible so that we will be able to establish what has worked well and what can be improved for future episodes. So to start, we'd like to share with you what to expect in terms of the poll questions that will be coming through, right? Do take a look at your screen as we launch our very first poll. And as everyone takes some time to enter your answers, I will be handing the time over to Kylie and Brandon as they take you through all things related to leave entitlements today.
Thank you so much, Sherlyn. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you here. As
Hi.
Sherlyn and Jamie said, I'm Kylie, and this is Brandon, and we're from the training team. So we'll just wait for the poll to come through before we get started on the demo. Today, we're going to take you through leave entitlement policies. So if you have no idea what this is, or if you do, hopefully you'll get some insight or some more depth knowledge onto creating leave entitlement policies. So we'll just give you 1 or 2 minutes to answer the poll. But going forward, you'll see as we go on, we might give you 1 or 2 more polls, and anytime we do that, we'll definitely pause what we're talking about and give you time to answer them. Cool. All right, so your poll answers have come through. Most of you know what leave entitlement policies are, so that's great. For those of you that don't know, oh, you're in for a surprise. Cool, so let's get started. Brandon, would you mind sharing your screen?
Sure, not a problem.
Cool.
Here we go.
Awesome. Thank you. So most of you might be familiar with this. This is our system. And when you log in, this is the page that you'll be greeted with. You'll see the employees page. So Brandon, when we talk about leave entitlement policies, we know that leave entitlement policies are the number of days of leave that an employee will receive in a leave cycle. So I'm wondering, if I want to create a leave entitlement policy, where is a good place to start? Do you think you could take us through how we can do that?
Sure, absolutely.
Cool.
So anytime that you want to configure any settings for your company, you go to settings on what we refer to as the sidebar menu. So we're going to go to settings. And once you go to settings, the thing that we are dealing with today, or the topic we're dealing with today, is leave. So you're going to want to click on leave once you go to settings. You'll then be given the various leave types. We have got 4 default leave types, but you can add your own leave types. And this will be covering in one of our later episodes, so do join us for that. Today, I'm going to be focusing on annual leave specifically, but the same principles apply to all of the various leave types. I'm going to click on view next to annual, and this will bring up the leave settings page for annual leave. At the top of the screen, you'll see some details about this particular leave type. And in a later episode, we're also going to look at how to configure these leave settings. So you'll see that for annual leave, for example, the cycle length is 12 months. So anytime that we're talking about annual leave and we're talking about annual leave cycles, we refer into a year and a 12-month period. And then you'll see further on down in the page, we've got this available entitlement policy section and this active entitlement policy section. And what we want to be looking at today is firstly this available entitlement policy section.
Cool. Thanks, Brandon. So before we touch on the active entitlement policies below, I think we should create an entitlement policy. Or actually, maybe we should start with the system policy. So what would be the difference between using the system policy or creating a brand new entitlement policy?
Okay, so like you said, an entitlement policy basically refers to how many leave days, and in this particular case, we're talking about annual leave days, are employees entitled to per leave cycle. So in other words, how many annual leave days do they get per year in this case? So SimplePay has already got a system policy available, and this is set up in accordance with the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So we try to keep you compliant and make things as simple as possible. So we've got a system policy that you can use, which makes sure that you are aligning with the rules of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. But we do have the options to create your own entitlement policies should you need them. So we understand that every business, every company has their own needs. So maybe you have some employees that are on a 16-day policy, some that are on a 20-day policy, some that are on a 25-day policy. So you can create,
that's a lot.
That is. So you can create entitlement policies for each of those groups of employees or each of those employees. So do you want to talk quickly about the system policy?
Yes, well, I think it might be a good idea to create an entitlement policy and then we can go through the steps. So let's say I wanted to create a different policy that goes over and above what the system policy is. Maybe we have it for a specific group of people, if that's possible. And I want to be generous. So if we can create the system, this new entitlement policy, and we can give 24 days, because you say that that's possible. Can you take us through how to set that up?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So in order to create your own entitlement policy that differs to the system policy, you're going to click on Create Entitlement Policy. But before we do that, it's good to understand what the system policy is so that you know whether that is relevant to your employees or not. So what the system policy is set up to do is the Basic Conditions of Employment Act says that employees are entitled to receive annual leave that is equivalent to the number of days that they would work in a 3-week cycle. So what this system policy does is it looks at an employee's regular working hours. So that regular working hours page when you setting up an employee, and it says, okay, if you work 5 days per week, then the system is going to multiply that 5 by 3 to say that you get 15 days per annum. So, and that entitlement will adjust according to the regular working hours that are set up for that employee. So if someone's working 6 days per week, then it would be 6 times 3, which is 18. If it's someone's working 4 days per week, then it's 4 times 3, which is 12. And that's how the system policy is configured. So if you want something that is not in alignment with that, so maybe like you said, you want to be more generous, then we can go ahead and create our own entitlement policy by clicking on Create Entitlement Policy.
Perfect.
All right,
Okay.
so the first part of this page asks whether you want to use a custom name for this entitlement policy. Would you like to use a custom name for this policy or not?
I definitely would, but I am curious as to if I didn't create a custom name, what would happen?
Okay, so if you didn't use a custom name, what the system would do is it would create a name for you based on the default entitlement. So if you had a policy that was 16 days, then that would be the policy's name, 16 days.
Okay, so let's set this up to say that this will be for an executive team. So we can just call it executive, and we're going to give that team 24 days default entitlement.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to click on use custom name, and then I'm going to enter the custom name that I want for this policy. And there I've actually used it before, so you can see it's already pre-populated, but you can obviously type in any name that you wish. So we've got our custom name as executive, and then the next field that we want to complete is the default entitlement. So this, you said, is 24 days for these executive, the managers of this company.
Exactly, let's give them 24 days.
Okay, perfect. So just also to let you know, that field, the 24 days, that refers to how many days they get per cycle. So not per month or per pay slip or anything along those lines, it's per cycle. So in this case, because we're dealing with annual leave, we're talking about a 12-month period. So how many days do they get per year? And that is 24 in this case.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying that. I think that can be a little bit confusing. So if we say default entitlement 24 days, but if we think about it, we wouldn't be getting 24 days per month, or we wouldn't be doing much work, or we wouldn't be at work for that many days.
True.
So that definitely makes sense.
Definitely.
Okay,
right.
So now we've got entitlement only available after. So this is probably intuitive. We can tell the system when someone should start earning these days. But I'm thinking, Brandon, in this situation, I don't know if this would apply for annual leave, because according to the BCEA, you should be earning, or yeah, maybe you could just take us through that.
Sure, not a problem. So you are right. So this entitlement only available after means that if you had to, for example, enter 3 in, it would say that you are not going to be getting annual leave for the first 3 months of employment. And according to the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, that obviously isn't the case. That's not legal. So
Sure.
This is more for leave types like study leave, where you say, okay, the employee must be with the company for maybe 6 months before they're entitled to receive study leave. But like I said, in terms of annual leave, we don't want to use this because that would go against the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. And you must remember that entitlement and accrual and approval are different things, right? So we might say, okay, we're not going to approve leave for employees that are in their probation period, which might be the first 3 months, which is perfectly okay, but they're still entitled to receive that leave. They're still entitled to accrue that leave, even though they might not be allowed to take it in that period.
Okay, cool. And then just to clarify, would we enter 0 here, or would we just leave it blank?
You can just leave it blank.
Okay, perfect. And then will you just take us through then use upfront accrual and allow leave to be carried forward to the next cycle?
Sure. So use upfront accrual basically means that the employees will receive this full default entitlement at the start of their leave cycle. So our leave cycle is set up to start on an employee's appointment date. So in other words, from their first day of working, if we clicked use upfront accrual, they would then receive those 24 days upfront. However, if we didn't click this, it would then be spread over the year. So employees would likely see it on their payslip if you've got those settings configured or enabled. And we would then take those 24 days and divide it by the number of payslips. So they'll see their leave accruing per payslip. So for example, if you've got a monthly paid employee, we would have 24 days divided by 12 months. So in other words, they would be receiving 2 days per payslip. But in the background of the system, we just spread it over the whole year. So you could pull up, you could look at their leave at any point in time and get what that accrual is up until that point in time.
So Brandon, sorry, just before you go on to the next checkbox. So we've been talking a lot about the cycle, which is a period of 12 months. If we just had to slightly backtrack and we go to use hours worked for accrual, and we've said that that's indicative of casual staff, when would we need to check that box?
So the Basic Conditions of Employment Act allows for 3 ways of setting the leave entitlement. So the first way is that you can give them 3 weeks worth of working days as the leave entitlement. The second way is that they can earn 1 day for every 17 days worked. And the third way is 1 hour for every 17 hours worked. So this checkbox over here allows you to either say that they earn 1 hour for every 17 hours worked, or if you give them a more favorable policy, maybe you want to say 1 hour for every 15 hours worked or 10 hours worked, or whatever it might be. So in this case, they would then earn leave based on the hours that they work. So I doubt that this is applicable to executives. So
no, not for the executive
we'll
team.
stick with the 24
The 24, perfect.
Okay, then we've got this allow leave to be carried forward to the next cycle, which basically means that at the end of the cycle, so at the end of the 12 months, at the end of the year, if they've got leave that's left over, so in other words, they haven't taken their full 24 days, does it expire or does it carry over? And if you do allow it to carry over, you can then allow it to expire within a certain amount of time. So maybe they can carry it over, but then they have to use it within 3 months or 6 months. So then you would say into 3 or 6 years to say that the leave is going to expire after 3 or 6 months.
Cool. And we also can then, sorry, Brandon, then we can also just leave that blank if we don't want it to ever expire.
Correct.
Okay.
And then, so maybe they can accumulate forever, but then, you know, remember that in maybe year 7, they might have accumulated 200 days or something ridiculous and take the whole year off.
They can just do a sabbatical.
Exactly.
Cool.
And then we've got this limit type. So this basically puts a limit on the number of days that they can carry forward to the next cycle. So if you say, okay, if they've got leave left over, they can carry it forward to the next cycle, but they can only take maybe 5 days over to the next cycle, in which case you'd use fixed number of days. Or if you want them to only be able to carry half of what their balance is, then you might say a percentage of balance and then choose 50%. So that's how you would use this field. But in this case, do we want the leave to be carried forward?
No, I think let's keep it simple. We won't allow that.
Okay,
but for the next one, cycle specific rules, I think this one is also intuitive, at least to me. But if we want to say that I don't want the executive team to get the full 24 when they start. So if we can create a cycle specific rule, which, you know, basically to tell the system that, say, in the first year, our executive team can get 18 days, and then maybe between years 2 and 3, then they can get 20 days. But then from their 4th year of working with the company, then they can get access to the full 24. Can you take us through then how to set that up?
Sure. So you're spot on in saying that cycle-specific rules basically allows you to set leave entitlements based on tenure or based on how long someone's been with the company.
Cool.
And the whole point of us doing this automatically is so that you don't have to set up separate policies. So if someone has, like you said, 18 days for the first year, and then they move over to 20 days in years 2 and 3, you don't want to have to set up separate entitlement policies and then remember, okay, this person now has reached year 2, so I need to change the entitlement policy, or okay, in year 4 I must change, and then that's just going to create.
No, that's too much, Brandon. That's too much.
Exactly. So yeah, we're going to add 2 cycle-specific rules because there's actually 3 rules, so you only need 2. There's 3 different entitlements, so you only need 2 specific rules. So I'm going to add 2. Okay. And then you said that the first entitlement you said was 18 days. Is that
18
correct?
days. Give them 18, yes.
And then the second one you said was 20.
20 days.
Perfect. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm entering the different entitlements, and then I need to tell the system when are these entitlements applicable to. So the 18-day entitlement, you said, is available only in the first year.
That's
so the
correct,
first
yes.
cycle that it's applicable to is year 1, and the last cycle that it's applicable to is year 1 as well.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'm going to explain it now again when we do the next one.
Cool.
For the 20-day entitlement, we say, okay, that's available in year 2. That's the first cycle that it's available from. And the last cycle that it's available or applicable to is year 3. So in other words, what the system is doing, it's saying, okay, they get 18 days in year 1, then they get 20 days in year 2, 20 days in year 3. If this was maybe 5, we would say, okay, it's 20 days in year 2, 20 days in year 3, 20 days in year 4, 20 days in year 5. So up until this last cycle. But in this case, we'll move it back to 3. And then what the system does is it says, okay, once we've reached year 3, there's now no longer any cycle-specific rules. So what we'll do then is we'll go to the default entitlement. So you always want this default entitlement to be the last figure that you're going to get. Otherwise, another way that you could do this is you could go, okay, I'm going to add another cycle-specific rules and make that year 4 to year 99, 24. But that's really not necessary. You can just remove this, and then the system will go to the default entitlement.
Perfect.
All right, can we go ahead and save this?
Yes, very important. Always save your work. Otherwise, we'll lose what we've set up. But before we go ahead to the next bit, I have a question for you. So if we had selected, this is going back to the use hours worked for accrual for casual staff. So if we can just go back to that screen.
Sure.
So just to make sure, would that be used for a restaurant that then works in shifts? So for people that get paid per the hour that they work, is that the situation that we'd use that?
It could be. So it all depends on the policy for your company, right? So if your company says that, okay, for this particular employee, they will earn leave based on how often they work, right? So in other words, how many hours they work, then you would use this field. Cool. I've worked in the restaurant industry where they gave fixed days and they had, okay, everyone has to work 4 days per week, and you would have a fixed 12 days per year as annual leave. So it all depends on your policy and how you how that is set up.
Okay, yes. Cool. Right, so save, perfect. So before, okay, cool. So we're now obviously going to need to assign the policy to someone. But before we do that, I think it's time for a poll, don't you think?
Sure, not a problem.
So the poll's coming up. So by including an entitlement policy under active entitlement policies or company defaults, will this policy automatically apply to all employees? And you can choose between 2 answers, so 50-50. So it's either yes or no, the policy needs to be assigned. So we'll give you a minute or some seconds, and then we'll go through the answer with you. To show how much you've been using active entitlement policy. Okay. So we'll just wait for your answer to come through. Okay. So most of our audience said no, the policy needs to be assigned. Is that true, Brandon?
Okay, so there's 3 ways that we can actually assign policies in SimplePay. So the first one is active entitlement policies, which refers to the company defaults. So what that does is if you assign someone to a company default policy, then, or if you create a company default policy, that will be assigned to all employees automatically and all employees that are added to the system. However, you can move people off of the company default policy. So you can go ahead and assign a different policy to employees that's not the company default policy. And that you can do in one of 2 ways. The first way being that we can do it individually from their payroll screen. And the second way is, or their payroll profile. And the second way is that we can do it in bulk. So let's first have a look at, I think, active entitlement policies. In this case, we've got a system policy and an executive policy. So would you like the system policy to apply to the company as a default?
I'm going to go ahead and say no, because we've got our executive team, and only the executive team will have the executive entitlement policy available to them. So then, if I understand correctly, so the system policy is for everyone in the company unless specified otherwise.
Yes.
So since we've got our system policy, but we've also created another entitlement policy, what would be the next step after this?
Okay, so because we've got a system policy that is set as the company default and we've got an executive policy, like you said, this executive policy shouldn't be applied to all employees by default, right?
Right.
So because this is not going to be assigned to all employees by default, we're going to leave the company default policy as the system policy, and then only change the employees to the executive policy that need to be on that executive policy.
Okay, cool. And then Brandon, in the event that my entire company was on the executive team, say, and we've now created this entitlement policy, would it then be possible to change the system policy default to not use the system policy that's created when you create your account?
Absolutely. So there's two ways of doing this. So the first way is if you want to change it sort of from the beginning of time. So you want to say, okay, everyone is on the executive policy from their appointment date, in which case you'd simply click edit, and then you'd change the policy and then click on update. Or alternatively, if this policy is effective from a particular date, so maybe everyone was on the system policy until the 1st of October, and then from the 1st of October, they're on a different policy, then you'd start by clicking on add entitlement policy range and then entering an effective date for that new policy to apply. So maybe you want to say the 1st of October, and then say that the executive policy applies from the 1st of October.
Okay, cool. And if we can go back to editing the system policy, what would happen if we just entered something? So if we go edit and we left effective from, so say everyone started on the system policy and we say effective until the 1st of November, would that then also, what would that do? Or do we need to create a second add entitlement policy range?
So if, for example, you made this the 1st of October, and let's say you made this the end of November, then the system is going to apply the system policy from the 1st of October till the 30th of November, but then there's going to be no leave before that and no leave after that.
Okay, cool.
So the system is going to say, okay, at the end of November, this employee now has 0 leave because there's no entitlement policy that's available to them, or they're not on any entitlement policy.
We can't have that.
No.
Okay, so take us through what we've done, what we do next now that we've created the executive entitlement policy.
Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go and assign this executive policy to those executives. So the first way is to do that from the employee's profile. So either you can search for their profile in the top right corner, or we can go to employees, and then we can select the particular employee. So I'm going to start with Tinkerbell.
Yep, seems accurate.
And then with Tinkerbell, you want to change her leave policy. So we're going to go to leave, and then we're going to go to entitlement policies. Again, you'll be given the current policy that is applicable to each leave type. And again, I'm going to be dealing with annual leave, but the same principles apply to all of the leave types. So in this case, I want to edit the policy that she's on. She's on the system policy because that is the company default policy.
Cool.
So I'm going to click on edit. Here again, right, we have two options. We can either leave the effective date blank, or we can enter an effective date. So maybe this Tinkerbell only became a manager from the 1st of October. So we're going to select the 1st of October as the effective from date. We're going to leave the until date blank because we don't want that policy to stop, or we want it to go on indefinitely. And we're going to select the policy that needs to apply. And when you click on create, you'll see that the system automatically then enters. So the system tries to be intuitive, and you'll see that it's automatically put in an effective until date for the system policy to apply, and then the new executive policy applies from that 1st of October that you entered.
Cool.
All right, so that's doing it on an individual basis. I'm just going to edit this and make no effective date. Okay, the other way that you can do it is you can do it in bulk. So maybe you've got multiple managers that you want to assign this policy to. So we're going to go to employees and then bulk actions. And then when we're dealing with leave, we want to be in the leave section, and we're going to look at the entitlement policies. Okay, this screen will now show you all of your employees, all of the leave types, and all of the policies that have been assigned to them. So you'll see that Tinkerbell is on the executive policy because we just changed that for her. And all of our other employees are on the company default policy, which in this case for annual leave is the system policy. You can use the filters at the top to make this list a bit smaller. So if, for example, using pay points like I am, I can use the pay points to select managers to make my life a lot easier. And there I'm given a list of the managers, and the managers are the people that we want to change the policy for.
Cool.
We've got the executive policy that applies to Tinkerbell. So we've got this nifty little feature that if you click on the arrow next to the leave type, we've got this option that says copy first value down, which will then apply whatever's in whatever applies to the first policy, it will copy it down to all of the other employees. So whatever applies to the first employee. So if I said the system policy must apply, and I said copy first value down, then the system policy would be applied to everyone. Let's change this to executive and copy it down. And then also don't forget to save, which is at the top.
And before you click save, I just wanted to double check with the filters, the pay point, pay frequency, and status. That needs to be set up beforehand. They won't just automatically appear.
So the pay points you would set up beforehand, yes, in settings. We can maybe look at that in a future webinar or a future episode where we can look at how to use pay points effectively. Pay frequencies, this would be based on the pay frequencies that you've assigned to your various employees. And that is part of setting up your company. And then the status just refers to active and inactive employees. So in most cases for this particular input, which is the leave policies, you're probably going to use pay points to assign those leave policies. Or maybe you have some weekly paid employees that are on one policy and monthly paid employees that are on another policy, in which case you might want to use this filter just to make the list a bit shorter so that it's easy to work with. But you can leave those filters completely blank and then just work with the entire list if you wish. But yeah, just to make your life easier, that's the filters are there.
Thanks, Brandon. And then we click save.
Yes. Okay, there we go.
I don't know what you think, but I think it's time for a poll.
Let's do it.
So there'll be another poll coming to your screen now. So are you able to assign multiple entitlement policies to one single employee? Again, we're giving you a 50-50 choice, yes or no. So we'll give you some time to think about it and give us an answer, and then we'll confirm if you have got it correct or not. Cool. So your answers are coming through. All right. Most people said yes, you are able to assign multiple entitlement policies to a single employee. Is that correct?
So remember, this depends on whether you're using effective dates or not. So if you're using effective dates, then you can assign multiple entitlement policies to a single employee and say that this policy is effective until this date and this policy is effective until this date. But you can't assign more than one policy at the same time. So you can't have an employee that's on a 15-day policy and an 18-day policy in the same month, because then the system is going to go, well, the system won't actually allow you to do it because we've set it up to be intuitive enough to prevent that. But if we did allow that, the system would go, okay, which one applies? Is it the 15-day or is it the 18-day? So we only allow you to assign multiple policies if you are using effective dates to indicate when the one policy stops and the next one begins.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks, Brandon. We're going to end the demo there. I'm going to hand over to Sherlyn and or Jamie to take us through the next section, which will be a Q&A.
Perfect.